I consider it a great honor to introduce our keynote speaker today, Larry Cohen. I got to know and respect Larry when he served as president of the Communication Workers of America from 2005 through 2015. Larry spent nearly his entire adult life as a member, organizer, and officer in our union, but his vision has always been more broad than just the union movement. Larry was the founding chair of Jobs with Justice, believing that workers' rights is a community issue, not just a fight for unions. Larry is a member of the Democratic National Committee and was appointed by Senator Bernie Sanders as vice chair of the Unity Reform Commission, whose mandate is to democratize the party structures and the presidential nominating process. Larry was the founding chair and remains on the board of the Democracy Initiative, a coalition of more than 50 membership organizations working together on voting rights and big money out of politics. Larry currently chairs the board of Our Revolution, the successor organization to Bernie 2016. Larry has always pushed us to look beyond our silos of individual organizations to ignite a movement for our common good. Without further ado, it is my pleasure to introduce my friend, Larry Cohen.
Thank you. Thanks, Kay. And shout out to Kay and my CWA sisters and brothers over here, and Bonnie and Steve and others who are here from CWA. Great to see you again. To Ken, wherever he is. Ken, you've been scarce here. I know you're here somewhere. And Charlie, there's Ken. This is, everybody here knows this is a great example of what a state federation can be. You don't have state presidents who sit back and listen all day like this. You don't have AFL-CIOs that want to hear from the community, that want to figure out how many partners can we have. This is a real model, and I know this is a tough time, whether you're the president of the AFL-CIO or anybody else in this room, in a political sense, but thank you guys, and pleasure to be back here. Also, my friend Espy is a friend for years. I don't know if he's still here or he left, but from Iowa CCI, and I can't give a shout out to everybody. I love being back in Iowa, but I do. My sister, a new great friend, Jan Bauer, sitting in the back there, who's leads the Story County Democrats and is one of the other 20 people on the Unity Reform Commission of the Democratic Party. And all I can say is that we've met, meaning this commission has met twice in the last 2 months. It has a big mission, which is to figure out how this becomes a party that belongs to the people as a whole, that brings in new voters, not just as voters, but with new energy, with a sense that you can be new and you can lead, and that appeals to independent voters. I'm sure everybody in Iowa realizes the biggest group of voters in this country are independent, and then the next biggest, a bit back, are Republicans, and then Democrats. So we have to, if we don't reach out to independent voters, what does that mean? We can't win. And I'm somebody who believes, and this whole talk is about, that I believe and we believe that we can win. And win means winning for working people and for working families. It doesn't just mean this one's better than that one. It means actually, hey, we can get people engaged in this, in political action and community action, in organizing on the job and building our unions even in the toughest of times, because we believe that we can win. We can win good health care. We can win good public education. We can win child care. We can win long-term care so that you don't have to be impoverished before you're on Medicaid for seniors. And this list goes on and on and on. And we can make this list up together as if we were painting a mural across the screen. Not just defense. So this word resistance in our country, and resistance is a big word to me. Having grown up in Philadelphia, if you can tell from this accent, at a time when we had a police commissioner who went after kids, mostly black kids, but also white kids like me. This was in the 1960s and 70s. And literally, I don't want to get into it here. It'll use up too many minutes. But everything that we can imagine that's bad about what police do, this was the police commissioner in Philadelphia when I grew up. He then went on to be the mayor for 2 terms. And he tried to change the charter so he could run and run and run. And racism doesn't begin to describe it. And it was an example to me as a young kid how you split people up, black and white, in a city where working class people had to be united, right? So I know what resistance means, literally since I was in high school, and how to deal with stuff like that. And I was a white kid. It's a lot tougher if you were a black kid in that same school. And so resistance is a big word, but resistance is not enough. It's not enough. We're not going to change what's going on in Iowa, and I'm pretty humble about learning here and not saying, oh, just, do this and do that. I'm really here to learn. But whether it's Iowa or anywhere in this country, we're not going to be transformational by resisting. We have to be transformational by presenting something that appeals to people, particularly those independent voters, particularly the 10% or more of Trump voters. It's not the majority of Trump voters, but the 10% of so of Trump voters. There are, in fact, working class voters. And how we think about uniting working families and with middle class families, whether we're black, brown, or white, what kind of language we have to use, how we have to be inclusive, as we heard from that panel this morning. And Charlie, great job on bringing that panel together. It was great to hear that panel. And to me, it was great because those were people, for the most part, who were newer at resisting, newer at fighting back, newer at organizing. And it says to people across Iowa, hey, we can do this. We can tell our story. We're brought together by the Iowa AFL-CIO, and we can go forward together. And I think that was great. So let's hear it for that panel and for the AFL-CIO for doing that. And so this week from another country, we got a real demonstration of what it means when we say we believe that we can win. Right? We believe that we can win. And as Jan and others here know, I mean, I'm big on saying, I used to be a car guy. I still am a car guy in some ways, but not in the same way. I don't fix cars. We look through the windshield, not the rear view mirror. Rear view mirror is small. So this isn't meant to say, let's look back on where we were 2 years ago, and I was honored to be with you then. And then I went on to work, as you heard, in the Bernie Sanders campaign as an advisor to him. He called me senior advisor. I would say to him, Bernie, you're a bunch older than me. I don't want to be called your senior advisor. That's an inside joke, sort of. But anyway. None of these comments are meant to rehash that, because we got to figure out where are we going, not so much where have we been, but learn a little bit from it. But huge parallels between the election in the UK on Thursday and what we might learn. Because my friends in the Labour Party in the UK, most of them were Corbyn folks. Many of them were saying, hey, we are fed up with being told that it's more austerity. That's the word they use more than we do, but more concessions, more giving up what we have as working families because of the global economy. And that was a big reason for the Brexit vote among working families. It wasn't necessarily the greatest idea to leave the European community. We're not going to hash that out here. We got enough of our own stuff. But the overwhelming lesson from that vote a year ago was, same thing we hear across Iowa. I've been to Iowa a lot in that Bernie campaign in 2015 when I was here with you. Since then, fighting with allies in this room, building a movement against the Trans-Pacific Partnership. And we should know, we won that fight. That was not Donald Trump. That was working class America and our allies saying, we will fight for our jobs, not watch them go one by one, whether it's John Deere or the meatpacking industry or anything else, that we will fight for our jobs. And that we should imagine, as part of that positive vision of America, that every kid who graduates high school should have a sense that I'm going to have a decent job. We should be able to guarantee that to kids in this country, that you're going to have a decent job, a job not at the minimum wage, but something that you can look forward to, that you can learn. And if not a decent job, that you go to higher education at a community college, and at the minimum, we'll provide that tuition free, like it was when I grew up in Philadelphia. You didn't have to pay to go to Philadelphia Community College. People went to UCLA and there was no tuition. Or Berkeley. And this was Brooklyn College, where Bernie went initially. No tuition. What is it that we have lost? What is it that we can learn in terms of real change is possible? And what is it that we can learn from Jeremy Corbyn? So it was a similar thing. He was way down in the polls and all this, right? And they put out what they called a manifesto. And that manifesto is something, if we did a survey here, we would all sign on to that manifesto of Jeremy Corbyn's, because it's the same stuff that we're talking about. It's not our defense. We're not going to win on defense. We've got to win by saying, yes, we will fight for Medicare for all. We want health care. We don't want health insurance. We want health care. We're fed up with health insurance where we pay $300 or $400 or $500 a month and then we pay $4,000 deductibles. That's not health care. That's health insurance. We want health care. Everywhere else in the world they have health care. People know that if they're sick, they don't have to it's enough to be sick, right? That's scary enough. What if somebody says you have a diagnosis of cancer? Of some sort. That's scary. In this country, we're scared about who's going to pay. And then you get the bills and you can't understand them. Because we spend 20% of our health care on the bills, on the processing, on the insurance. 20%. Why don't Republicans and independents think about that when we talk about waste? Instead of, I want to cut my taxes and cut the government. Why don't we cut out the insurance companies? 20% is $1 trillion a year. $1 trillion. In many countries, that $1 trillion would fund health care for almost the majority of the population, a country the size of our country. And we don't seem to think that's waste. The government is waste. We've got to turn this stuff around. And we've got to take these issues and put them together. Start out with issues like good, decent jobs. Yes, Fight for 15 is a clear part of that. And how we get to that point. And how we see that as those are our jobs. Those are our kids' jobs. Not those are somebody else's jobs. I have mine. And for those of us that are here from labor, and again, this federation is a great example of not doing this, but all too often, we're almost 100% transactional when we go to do political work and we come from labor. And it's not just labor. I'm singling out labor because lots of us here spend our lives or spend our lives doing that work. We've got to make our political work about all of us. We've got to have a vision that brings all of us together when we do political work in labor. And the folks that are here, whether you're leading a labor union or you're active in a labor union or you're an ally of a labor union, this isn't easy for labor because the members say, well, here's the contract. What did I get? How's the political work connected to the contract? And so we end up with narrow issues. So if I was in the building trades, my issue could be that job. And you could all fill in what that might mean in our time. Or if I'm from the CWA, it might mean these jobs over here, and this company needs this work, and that's going to determine my political work. Or if I'm from the public sector, it could mean, well, we're going to support this person. They're not that good, but they're going to be there when our budget issue comes up, but then they're going to screw everybody else. So it's a tough job when you're the Federation of Labor or when you're trying to build this bigger community of working families. Because whether we're in a union or let's just take another example that'll probably get me in trouble. We're active in, say, the National Abortion Rights League, NARAL. I didn't quite get the name right. We can't do just single-issue politics. We have to figure out, as one of the speakers said this morning, how we knit these things together, how we go forward looking through the windshield about the rights that we're fighting for. And obviously, the rights of women to make up their own healthcare decisions is a core right for all of us, whether we're a woman or a man or transgender or anything else. But we can't just do one issue and hold it above all other issues. We've got to bring these issues together and build that kind of vision. That's what Corbyn was about. That's what this Labor Party was about. And even though when you read that manifesto, this comes back to what are we fighting for in Iowa? How do we knock on doors and talk to farmers and talk to workers, talk to union folks, whether they're in a manufacturing plant or a service, a private sector service or a public sector service? What does our message sound like? And how do we break through? And how do we build a movement in Iowa based on hope and not fear? And based on what we can bring forward, not defending just what we had before. And that's what they were able to do in the UK. And the predictions were dire. This is going to be the end of the Labor Party. And instead, they gained 30 or 31 seats in that parliament. And Jeremy Corbyn, when you add together the popular vote across the United Kingdom, the last time Labour did that well, it was around 42% he got of all the votes. Not he. The Labour Party, they do it differently there. The last time they did that well was 1997. And so all the pundits who said, you got to be in the middle of the road to do well. Labor's got to stay in the middle of the road. This is the Labour Party we're talking about now. The middle of the road. It's my friend Jim Hightower, who's been here in Iowa a bunch of times, would say, and has said for years, the only thing in the middle of the road is yellow stripes and dead armadillos. And if you're not from, maybe you don't have armadillos here, I don't know, but, but you get the idea. Dead squirrels where I'm from, that's what we would have. I'll tell it that way. Dead deer in Iowa, okay, I'll say it that way from now on. Maybe I'll do better with that. And so we believe that we can win. And this is not just about, so number one, it's what's our messaging. And how do we do that so that when we look at Iowa or any one of the 99 counties, Story County, Polk County, any one of the counties, because local issues matter a lot, right? Most people say, well, you know, these national issues like health care, we can't do anything about that anyway. So, you know, how we knit together local issues, state issues, national issues into a coherent message is key. And we want to do that in a way, I think, you'll tell me, hopefully we can ask some questions, or even if it's individually at the end, some way we get some feedback. That's what we have to do to break through, because, again, resistance is great, but if resistance means all the people that have been on our side hit the streets, yes, that's great, because that encourages us in a time of despair and discouragement. But actually, we got to figure out these 99 counties in Iowa. And I've said this a lot for years, one of the reasons I like coming here. If we can't figure out how to build that kind of messaging in Iowa, we're not going to figure it out anywhere else. Because more time is spent per person in Iowa with some 3 million people, I think, partly because of the Iowa caucus, than anywhere else. And it may be only every 4 years. That's not good, and you all know that in this room. We've got to figure out how do we build political organization of some sort on an ongoing basis. It's not about every 4 years. That may be important to the candidates that are running. We're not going to change Iowa that way every 4 years. And so figuring out this messaging about rural Iowa, or the small towns of Iowa, or the larger cities of Iowa, and what works, and cutting through this kind of message that's some combination of division and despair and actual hate, because racism is part of this message coming from this president and others in his party at this point, as we all know. But replace it and cut government and cut taxes, and you're on your own. You know, that's their message. And we've got to continue to think through, okay, I'm knocking on doors. I'm in one of the rural counties in Iowa. How does that message correspond to the message, say, here in Story County, which is, again, somewhat different because big university and other things. If we don't figure that out here, we're not going to figure it out in this country. On the other hand, if we do figure it out here, we're going to figure it out. And, you know, I have my own beliefs. You've just heard about a bunch of the issues I think we have to string together to convince people that we can do a lot better and that we can be better off as well when we do it. We're not just doing it out of, you know, martyrdom or for somebody else or altruism. No, we're doing it for our families, but our families are our families. You know, all our families. And one of the reasons, you know, I was encouraged this morning is when we heard the story from, I'm trying to think of the brother's name who was down on the end there, Dale. Yeah, Dale's kid is our kid. If we don't act that way, we're out of our minds. It's not just Dale's kid. Yeah, it's primarily Dale's kid. But that's our kids. That could be any of our kids. And that's the sense of community that we have to build. And in my view, from, again, being across the country and seeing a lot, learning a lot from that Bernie campaign, we did very well in rural areas, is a message of hope and authenticity and of community and of caring. Yeah, absolutely we can do that. And it does mean to have that authenticity, we have to deal with this problem of funding our political work frankly, without corporate money. And that's a challenge. And that's not easy. You don't have to be Jan Bauer or somebody on the DNC, and there's others here on the DNC, to understand the challenge of that. Because the other side will take dark money, wherever money they can get, and it's always, we hear on our side, more money, more money, more money, more money. But think about this. Maybe in Iowa we experiment. In the nominating process at least, is there a way we can say, wait a minute, we're going to set some limits here. Whether we're Democrats or independents, we're going to figure out how to set some limits here on candidates who are only here because they're self-funders. So I was in Chicago yesterday, and they have two Democratic candidates running. One's a billionaire for governor, and they have a billionaire governor now, Rauner, who's awful. And the two leading Democrats, one's a billionaire, J.B. Pritzker, and the other one is Chris Kennedy, who owns the Merchandise Mart in Chicago. Yes, he's the son of Robert Kennedy, and that's great. But point is, he's a nominee, potential nominee, because he has hundreds of millions of dollars. And the other people who are trying to run, who have been in public service, they're crowded out right off the bat. Because in the nominating process alone, that's estimated to be a $10 million election. That's for the Democratic nominee. And then we wonder why, particularly younger people, are turned off about how the Democratic Party functions. And some version of this is operating right here in Iowa. I don't want to get into the Iowa part, because number one, I'll be stepping in shit, and number two, and I do that at times, but number two, I don't know half of what the people in this room know. So, but this is part of our problem. Another line from Hightower from the past. Somebody said to him, why don't we start a third party? And he said, well, I'm still waiting for the second party. And that's not, at a time like this, there's huge differences, obviously. But the point is, again, if we believe that we can win as working families, and if we believe that that agenda is pretty clear cut, that we could do it in an elevator ride or running up the stairs here, we could describe it. It's about caring. It's about community. It's about health care. It's about education. It's about decent work for every kid coming out of high school or a higher education where they don't be bankrupt at the end of it. And we go on from there. If we believe we can do that, we need to figure out how we build political organization, whether we're in a union or in a community group. As Kay said, I chair the board of Our Revolution. And what we're experimenting with is to make it really easy for people to build groups. So any 10 members is a group. And they can be in somebody's house in rural Iowa, and they are. And a member is anybody who shows up at a meeting. So you showed up at a meeting in somebody's house. You want to be a member? Okay, you're a member. There's 10 of you. Now you're a group. You sign up. You're one of the 900 and something groups in Our Revolution. And this is not meant as a commercial. We got to do a lot of things, not just Our Revolution, but just an example. We call it inclusive organizing. And then we network those groups, and we take on national issues. We encourage people to do state issues, to work with groups like the Iowa AFL-CIO or ICANN or Iowa CCI, many other groups that are here, inclusive organizing, and figure out what we can do together. But the key is not just to have the roughly 70,000 Bernie voters that subscribe to Our Revolution in Iowa. Not just to say, oh, we can send emails to those people and they'll contribute money. No, but to move away from that to say, no, wait a minute. If we're going to do sustained political work, people need to be in some kind of political organization. They could be in a Democratic club. They could be in an Our Revolution group. They could be in the political action group in a union. Some kind of political organization with something that ties them together about a vision. And then how do we tie those groups together across Iowa? And how do we knock on enough doors in rural Iowa or go to enough meetings in farmhouses that people come together in because they're organizing themselves, not people who don't live there doing it, so that we have the kind of political network that we're not starting over all the time, that we're building all the time, so that even in bad moments, like the legislature here, it's a bad moment, or the Trump government, right? Obviously a bad moment. And for all the talk he gave us to working families, and he did get some of our members, Hopefully not that many from CWA, but he did get at least 10, maybe 20% of them. Because he talked about trade in a different way. He talked about more jobs. He talked about $1 trillion in infrastructure. Some of these were Bernie messages. We've got to own up to that. But what has he done? He lies, yeah, not just to the FBI director. That's the least of it. He's lied to millions and tens of millions of American working-class families between what he said he would do and what he has done. We got a government now, as you all know, of bankers. Wall Street, Goldman Sachs got more people in this government than they did in the Obama White House, and that was too many. We got the bankers, the billionaires, the bastards, and the bullshitters. That's the Donald Trump government. So, we have a message that's progressive and populist, that works urban and rural, and we're going to work on that. We're going to learn in Iowa how we can make that into some coherent network and not try to win elections in Iowa, whether it's for the Senate or for the governor or for the president in 6 or 7 counties. We got to learn lessons here. Because if we're going to change things nationally, and Iowa is a key model, those other 92 or whatever it is counties, we got to figure that out. We got to have leadership in every one of those counties. And again, part of the reason in our revolution we make this so easy, we want to get groups everywhere. We want to get people to be precinct chairs everywhere, not just in places like this, where lots of people would be willing to do this, but in these rural areas as well. Even if we don't win, win can't be defined as the next election. We're not a baseball team. And I come from Philadelphia. We have the worst team in baseball, so we're definitely not looking at the next game. And that's a trivial example, but we can't have that kind of mentality. We got to have the mentality that we win when we get more people to join our groups, just like in the union. When we asked, we said this in CWA organizing for years, if you want hundreds of people to join, you got to ask hundreds of people to join. They're not going to just join because you stand up here and ask them to join and they're not here. You actually got to go and talk to them. And again, great example from, I'm learning these names, Shane, in the panel this morning. Shane said, I was a teacher for a year. I decided I could be president of local. I thought that was great. There's a lot of people that say, a year and you did that? How about starting, active member, volunteer, shop steward? I thought that was great. But more importantly was when he said that he went and talked to all the non-members and 8 of them joined. The key was, if you want 8 to join, you better talk to at least 8, if not 10. And it's the same thing with a political movement. If we want to build organizations, and it doesn't, as long as we're aligned together, I come from a place, I don't care which one it is. Now, when I was the president of CWA, and people were organizing a union, right, Kay, I wanted it to be CWA. But in this role that I'm in now, they join any union, I'm happy. And similarly, any political organization that aligns with us around this populist progressive message, and then we knit ourselves together. But building something that we can sustain and that's progressive in terms of what do we stand for. It can't just be, and Jan and I have talked about this, it can't just be sign up to be a Democrat this summer. Well, what does it mean to be a Democrat? I mean, really, what does that mean? Everybody can't have a different answer. What are we building? What are we fighting for? What is that vision? And are we willing to fight for it and not just, well, my team won? We've got to fill in what that message really means in some coherent way. And some of the issues that we're going to take on are harder. So in a place like Iowa, we're going to get divided up on issues like immigration. And I've been, especially as president of CWA, went to our members in the South because we were very much supporting immigration reform and a path to citizenship. And to me, that was really about 2 things. One was, as I would say, when my family, the different shreds of it, came to this country, 125 or so years ago, they were not Nobel Prize winners. Now, there's 2 reasons for that. One, there was no Nobel Prize at the time, so they couldn't have been Nobel Prize winners. The other is, they didn't read and write. And they came from all different places in Europe. And believe me, we're not truthful enough about this, especially white people who came 19th century immigrant families. A huge majority were more like my family. where they came because they had nothing, or they were being persecuted, or some combination of both. And when they came until late 1920s, they could vote in 4 or 5 years at the maximum. In places like Philadelphia, they couldn't wait to drag you in to vote. They had a ward leader, and, oh, we'll take care of you, and you'll vote for this one. And you might get a job, and that kind of notion. And so number one is, do we want to really be the first generation, and if this keeps going, it'll be the first and the second generation of Americans saying, well, you can do shitty work here, and you can work your ass off, and fight hard for your family, and never have a path to vote and a path to citizenship. Is that really what we want? But the second thing is, who are we kidding here? This is part and parcel of what the billionaires and the bankers and the bastards and the bullshitters want to design so that they win elections when they're not a majority of the people. Immigrants are overwhelmingly working class people. This is the Working Family Summit. We got to get out of the notion, and I'm sure it's not people in this room, but we got to be able to talk to people in those factories and say, wait a minute, you may be feeling nervous about what's going on here in my town, in our town, but these are working class people. And if we want to have health care for all, they're going to vote for us if they have a way to vote. We have 11 million green card holders in America who can't vote. These are not illegal immigrants. These are green card holders. So unlike my, whatever they are, great-great-grandparents who didn't pay anything, it's $900 and something now to go from green card to citizenship, and it takes hundreds of hours to do it. It's almost like a new literacy poll tax rolled into one. Two of the things that led to segregation in the from like 1890 to 1960. Not just segregation, but denial of voting rights. And so we have to work through tougher issues like this. But we also have to realize we got to be fools not to fight for immigrants to be citizens and to vote, because they're working class people and they're going to vote with us 90% of the time. And when we don't have those 11 votes sprinkled across this country, we're going to lose elections that we would have won. It's just another form of redistricting, and you're familiar with that in Iowa. It's just another way to draw the map so that our chances of winning are less and less and less and less. Tough issues. I'm not saying it's simple. We got a lot of tough issues. Because the other side, their job is to come up with tough issues that divide us up and not to unite us. They're never going to unite us. They've never united us. The robber barons of the 19th century would say, we can pay half the working class literally to kill the other half of the working class. Well, they may not be killing us off yet or now, but politically they are. And, one of the benefits I had in the Bernie campaign is that, as some of you know, there was a pretty strong connection made between the Vatican and Bernie Sanders. And that's sort of interesting, given that he grew up in a Jewish working class family in New York, and yet he has this special connection to Pope Francis. And that's because of Pope Francis, frankly, not Bernie. And Pope Francis decided that his mission as Pope, this is pretty special, was about all of humanity and the earth. This is why he's way out there on climate change. And that humanity has to be purposeful about the earth and about each other. And for those who know the history of the Catholic Church, that was not exactly always the philosophy of the Catholic Church. And so, some of the follow-up to that, I've been fortunate enough to work with folks in the Vatican and listen and learn. And we can take this same spirit. Doesn't matter our faith. I mean, it matters to each person, but I'm saying we can be from different faiths or secular. This notion that our mission is about humanity and it's about the earth, and that's not corny. It's a little bit spiritual, but that's what we start from. And if Pope Francis can do that, and you think about, right in Iowa, for example, The bishops don't always talk like that. I know that's a shock to people here. Often other issues, I'm not getting into them again, are prominent, and we don't get to the common humanity and taking care of the earth. And I'm not trying to be critical of anybody. Again, here I'm stepping into more shit. I'm trying to be looking for common ground here. But if that is the message of this Pope, rather than what popes before have mostly done, we can take heart from that. And we can figure out that we can win. And what the Labour Party just did in the UK, for those of us who come from Labour or our allies that are here in this room, needs to be an inspiration, at least for this week. But we can also take inspiration from the 4 people who presented today, relative newcomers to doing this kind of activist work and what they've been able to do. And I'm sure in every organization here we can take inspiration from newer members, just as Jan Bauer said to our Unity Reform Commission twice she said, I didn't care whether they're for Bernie or for Clinton. I need new people. I need more people. I need people. We need to learn from each other, regardless of which side we were on in that kind of thing. We need to create something that unifies us and that builds a progressive vision. And I think in our own way, we can each do some version of that. And if we do that, we can figure it out, these 99 counties. We can figure out a political movement that will change Iowa. And the rest of us will learn from Iowa how we transform our nation, how we move beyond resistance. And most of all, we need to march out of here today believing that we will take action together. And we need to believe that we can win. Thank you all.